Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual conversation. I'm Josh Landon, news anchor and reporter for Fox 2 News, and it's my pleasure to join you for Gift of Life Michigan's Faith Leaders Around a Table. No matter your cultural or religious beliefs, organ and tissue donation provides hope and healing. That's why Gift of Life has decided to host this type of event, which is part of their Let's Talk campaign to educate all communities, especially multicultural communities, about the importance of organ and tissue donation. This year is especially significant because it marks a Gift of Life Michigan's 50th anniversary of honoring life through donation. Faith and support leaders play a critical role in the organ donation process. They wear many hats in our community: role model, mediator, and counselor, among others. We look to them for prayer, advice, and guidance, especially when we're going through hardships. Currently, there are about 2,500 people waiting right now for a life-saving organ transplant here in the state of Michigan. Over half are from multicultural communities. Faith leaders are the voices, and their voices are crucial to the decision about whether to become an organ donor. It is vital that we have these very important conversations before it becomes critical. Today, we have guests representing various backgrounds and faith beliefs. I invite you to open your hearts and your way of thinking to our leaders as they discuss the impacts Gift of Life Michigan is making in the community, and why it's important than ever for people to sign up for the Michigan Donor Registry. Now, before I get to our extraordinary panel, I want to bring in Artelia Griggs, who wants to share a very special story with you, her own personal story. Artelia, good morning to you.
Good morning, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm honored always to tell what I call Angie's story. Sometimes it can be lengthy, but this morning I will be brief. I lost my daughter, Angela Yvonne, on November the 10th in 2010. Angie, as we all called her, was vibrant, she was compassionate, she was loving, she was a very generous person. And she was 38 years old when she passed away in a Philadelphia hospital from a severe asthma attack. Angela loved life and she lived it to its fullest. And shortly after she passed, I was informed that she was a registered organ, eye, and tissue donor. Now, I never knew this. I wasn't aware because I'm sure she or neither of us could imagine that she would leave before I would. Shortly after she passed, Gift of Life Philadelphia contacted me, and I was told that she was eligible to donate her corneas, skin tissue, bone, and heart valves. Although I was grief-stricken at the time, I knew that Angela had made this decision and that it was the right decision. But it wasn't until about a year later that I attended a Gift of Life's annual Donor Memorial Family Gathering in Philadelphia that I was able to realize the magnitude of the gifts that Angela's donations. After meeting many organ, eye, and tissue recipients that attended the event and hearing their expressions of gratitude, I was just overwhelmed with a sense of joy and a sense of pride at what Angela had done. The key message for me was when a donor mom spoke about the tragic loss of her son. She proudly spoke about how tremendous the gifts were that he had given and how he had saved and enhanced so many lives. And it was then that I realized that Angela's gifts had done the same things for so many people, most of whom none of them that she actually knew. And I understood then that her gift was not just an ordinary gift, it truly was the gift of life. Now I talk with joy about Angela's life, and I can speak about her death with pride, knowing that she gave so that others might have life and have it more abundantly. So when I returned to Detroit after that event, I immediately sought and found many ways to become active in the donation and transplant community. And there's a lot more to Angie's story, but I know we don't have a lot of time this morning, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Artelia, thank you very much for sharing your personal story about your daughter. And you are one of the members on our panel, so we'll be getting more of your perspective momentarily. So yes, I would like to introduce our entire panel for this virtual event. Someone put some headphones on. It's all good. But yes, first, let's introduce first Raman Singh. Raman is a Sheikh and serves as chair of the Interfaith Leadership Council. Good morning to you. Shama Mehta, a Hindu chaplain. Again, Artelia Griggs, a deacon, and as you just heard, a donor mom. Brazier, a chaplain at the University of Michigan. Imam Steve Elturk and Naman in the Muslim community. And last but not least, Rabbi Daniel Schwartz, a rabbi at the Temple Shir Shalom in West Bloomfield. Panelists, good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
All right, it's great to see all of you. So yes, we're going to get into our Q&A, if you will, but let's treat this as a discussion rather than a scripted conversation. Feel free to illustrate key points throughout the dialogue to demonstrate the importance of signing up for the Michigan Donor Registry and give us an inside look at how young people grapple with this decision to donate and address the misconceptions. Each of you will have roughly 2 minutes or so to give your perspective, and then we'll move on. And as we move on in this discussion, whoever feels like adding their perspective to the conversation, I'll present the question and then raise your hands, and then I'll get to each of you as we move forward. So the first topic we're going to tackle is impact. For 50 years, Gift of Life Michigan has provided education and advocacy for organ and tissue donation, especially in communities that are most vulnerable. Thinking of your work in the community, how are you working to make an impact in the effort to increase donations? Who would like to join in first? Okay, Rabbi Schwartz, please chime in.
Excellent. So again, thanks for having us on and for giving us the opportunity to talk about this incredible work that Gift of Life is doing and others are doing as well. And what do we do at Temple Shir Shalom to be able to increase knowledge and support for Gift of Life and organ donation? One of them has to do with this weekend's Shabbat. This weekend is the donor Shabbat. Across the nation has been a donor Shabbat. And so at many Sabbath services and religious institutions across the United States, we talk about the tradition of organ donation. And so we've done that for a number of years. This year is a little bit different because of COVID, but we've had speakers in the past who have come and presented and talked about and shared their stories and the incredible impact that it's had, both as recipients of organs and as those who have, like Artelia shared with Angie's story, shared their stories of their family members who made those donations as well. And I think that's had an incredible impact, especially in our community, where for many believed at one point that Judaism didn't allow for organ donation, when it's actually quite the opposite, where most major branches support organ donation and encourage it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Here's another question I have for the panelists. What diseases and pre-existing conditions impact the communities you all represent?
Well, as you know, diabetes and high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and obesity are very prevalent in the African American community. And these ailments also lead to heart diseases, strokes, kidney failure, and other life-threatening diseases. And so often in Black families, there's a history of these illnesses. So, most of the time, a Black family will have relatives that has one or more of these diseases or pre-existing conditions. As a result, kidney failure has had a devastating toll in the Black community. You can find a dialysis center almost anywhere in and around Detroit communities. And unfortunately, even though we have this very high percentage of patients on dialysis and in need of kidney transplant, we're among the lowest of the donors, organ donors. So it does have pre-existing conditions, has a very traumatic impact on our community.
Indeed, Artelia, thank you. Raman Singh, you wanted to give your perspective as well on this question.
Thank you. I think this is a really important conversation we're having. I think that the awareness of the importance of organ and tissue donation is relatively low in the Sikh community. We, as a community, suffer from some of the diseases that Artelia mentioned. Diabetes is very prevalent, as is heart disease. Particularly among South Asian men, it's it's a disproportionately common ailment that we see. Our community is really service oriented, so they spend a lot of time doing things like holding healthcare, awareness events and trying to serve healthy food and doing things like that. So I think that this idea of organ and tissue donation would gain a lot of traction in our community. I think it's just a matter of spreading awareness, because this kind of service that could continue even beyond your own lifetime, I think would be a very powerful message, and it would really resonate with the Sikh community. And it would also probably give them some incentive to consider their own their health as we live, because it would remind them that there are steps we can take to improve our health as we're living, and then there are steps we can take to help others after our physical body has completed its journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Communicate and raise awareness. Time and time again, we hear that donation is really a life-saving act. How do these life-saving treatments impact our communities?
I suppose I can go. Let me first thank you so much for this program, wonderful program, and thanks for your guests sharing their experiences on this important subject, donor donation. I will concur with Raman and our community as well. This is a subject that is not really talked about much, simply because of misunderstanding about organ donation. Typically, the majority of our congregation is an immigrant congregation from Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And that's a subject that is very controversial, whether it is permissible to give organ donation and transplantation. Is it Islamically possible or not in principle? So we as a community have not been really involved much in the organ donation, and that's something that I'm grateful for this program, so I can take it to the Imam's Council and put this on the agenda and start promoting this in the community. Now, that's not to say that our community members are not participating in. I myself an organ donor on my driver license because I believe in it, and we have this principle in Islamic jurisprudence. Whoever saves a life it is as if he saves the entire humankind. So from that point of view, we have a difference of opinion among the scholars, but most scholars, particularly the jurists here in North America, the Muslim jurists, have permitted the giving of organ as donations. Of course, there are limitations, and it's subject to some conditions, but nevertheless, it is welcomed, and that's something, God willing, we will take forward with our communities and make sure that this is something our communities are aware of and is encouraged, highly encouraged.
Shama, please chime in.
Hi, thank you for having us today. So one of the things that kind of keeps coming back in the larger Hindu community as well, the Hindu mandir, the Hindu temples have been running drives annually for donors, having to get them registered, and talking about it, kind of tying it back to the faith tradition, reiterating the fact that in the Hindu tradition, we are not our body, we are the soul. So, and then tying that back into the highest ideal of service, seva. So giving of your body is like one of the highest service that you can provide even after your soul leaves the body. So kind of tying all of those back into the drives has been really, really helpful. One of the things that I keep coming back is the idea of trust factor in towards the healthcare community, as in making sure that they know that when their loved ones' organs are donated, that they would be given the right respect and with dignity also, but also that they will be used um, appropriately and not just being sold for money. And that's a community, like an immigrant community mindset, where you're not fully trusting whether or not your organs that were donated or they would be used correctly. So that kind of ties back, but then an education piece that we're working very strictly towards. And also the South Asian community has so many languages. So kind of translating the English versions of it in multiple languages and making sure that everybody is fully aware of what Gift of Life does, and all of their practices and procedures have been really, really helpful so far.
And before, Shama, thank you for your perspective. And before we move to the next topic, LJ, I want to bring you in for a quick second and get your perspective on the role of faith leaders when it comes to organ and tissue donation.
And thank you, Gift of Life Michigan, for having us all. Faith leaders play an extraordinarily important role in folks' decisions to donate organs and other healthcare-related decisions. I have had the privilege of being at Rabbi Daniel's donor Shabbat a couple of times, and I think that's a really powerful example of how faith leaders and faith communities can facilitate conversation, but can also expose communities to donor families and donor recipients so that folks can really bear witness to the fruits of that gift. Because that's what's really powerful about it, that, like Raman and others have mentioned, you're giving a gift after your death. And so getting to really bear witness to the service and the life that someone is giving after their death is really extraordinary. So I think Rabbi Daniel's example is an excellent one. And any other ways that faith communities and faith community leaders can facilitate open and honest conversations about what people are afraid of, what people are worried about, what the tradition says, but also what the actual healthcare information is. Like Shama mentioned, we really need to make sure that accurate healthcare information is getting out to people in a culturally appropriate and linguistically congruent way. Because it's not fair to expect people to make life-changing, values-based decisions in a language that's not their native language. So faith communities can often help be that interpreter as well, but only if they really actively engage with the health providers and healthcare organizations who can provide the accurate information. So that's one of the gifts I think that chaplains like Shama and I can bring, is that we can provide that bridge. We spend our time steeped in this healthcare environment, so we can bring the accurate information, but we also spend a good deal of time in multi-faith dialogue. So we can also help other faith leaders interpret the healthcare information accurately to their congregation. So I think there's always an opportunity for chaplains to engage more with local faith communities, and there's always opportunities for large events like the one that Rabbi Daniel talked about, and the sort of healthcare fairs that Raman and Shama mentioned. And then there's also opportunities for small group conversation. I know in my tradition, a lot of the big conversations happen in small groups. And so, making sure that we're engaging those small groups of faith community members and, talking one-on-one about organ donation, our fears, our worries, the information, what our tradition says. And not only organ donation, also other aspects of advanced healthcare directives. We don't do a good job largely as faith community leaders, really taking the initiative to say to folks, look, so you're going to die, and you need to have a plan for how that is going to happen meaningfully for you. Because if you don't make the decision, it's going to be made for you, and it's no guarantee that it's going to be the decision you want. And so you have to take that time to make those decisions yourself. And full disclosure, I'm an organ donor myself too, as Imam Elturk said.
Wow. LJ, thank you very much. We're going to move to our next topic in the conversation, and that is misinformation. We know that many people get their news from various sources, including Fox too, I hope, heightening the need to address the misinformation floating in our communities. Can each of you address some of the misinformation about organ and tissue donation? What more needs to be done so people are making informed decisions?
Well, I can speak to that. As a volunteer for Gift of Life Michigan, I've had the opportunity to visit many of the Secretary of State's offices. A few years ago, I did that probably once or twice a month. And what we did was set up a table where we passed out information to the customers at the Secretary of State's offices so that when they approached the clerk, they could make an informed decision about whether they wanted to be an organ donor or not and sign up on the Michigan Donor Registry. I got so much feedback, starting with, no, I'm not doing that, because if they see that on my license, that heart on my license, the doctor will not save me if I'm in an accident. And I have to explain to them how false that is, that those are two separate operatives there. You have the emergency room doctors, and then you have the transplant doctors, and they don't work in tandem. So that's not going to happen. And the doctors take an oath that they have to do everything they can to save your life. Sometimes I can convince them, and sometimes I couldn't. Other misconceptions or misinformation is, I won't be able to have a funeral because I can't have, they won't be able to open my casket. I'll be mutilated. And I, from a personal perspective, I can tell them, my daughter was a donor. She had a funeral. She had an open casket, and there was no evidence of any donation. So those are the type of things that we hear in the community, and we just have to dispel those misinformations when we hear them right away.
Artelia, thank you. Shama, please chime in, and then Rabbi, I'll get to you next.
I agree with what Artelia is saying. I think one of the issues that have come up just within the community, as well as my work as a chaplain at the hospital, is not knowing how to kind of process once you know that a patient or your loved one is an organ donor. A lot of times the conversation hasn't happened yet, that the patient's family would know that the patient is a donor. And then when the time comes, it may become an issue because they don't know the laws. And we did have a situation like that where the patient's family was like, oh, so what? That person is a donor. We as a family, as next of kin, refuse to donate. And then that's when, we work with the Gift of Life representatives and try to make them understand what the Michigan laws are, because every time, even we encounter something like that, we learn something new. So having that information easily and readily available would also be very, very helpful. Like what the laws are, what does the state of Michigan say once you're an organ donor, what works, what doesn't work, who can say yes, who can say no. But also the other side of organ donation, that just because you are an organ donor doesn't necessarily mean that when the time comes that your organs may be recovered for transplant, because it's not always the case. And we had a personal experience with that with my grandmother, who really wanted to donate her her whole body to science, and the way things happened with her, they were not able to use any of her organs, and that was disappointing for us as a family, because that's what she really, really wanted. All of our family is an organ donor, has signed up, but then not recognizing that was disappointing. Like we didn't expect that there would ever be a time. But being fully aware of that has helped make more informed decisions as well. So like knowing the laws, making sure what works, what doesn't work, and how we really take care of bodies, that should the time come, that our organs would be fit enough to be donated.
All right, thank you. Rabbi Schwartz.
In our community, there's often been a question of whether this is permissible, and I imagine that's probably the case for many religious communities as well. That I think of a story of a young woman from our congregation who had meningitis, whose name was Emily Stillman, and she and her family were the ones that really sparked the initiatives that we've had here at Temple with our organ donor Shabbats, with bringing in Gift of Life and doing drives, with having pamphlets that are put out on our counter as kind of a just background information for people to be able to have as well. And as the Stillman family was working with one of my colleagues, the question was raised: was it permissible within Judaism to allow for organ donation, organ and tissue donation? And the answer, of course, is yes, but there's that question out there, at least in our community, because of a tradition of making sure that one's body is buried whole. And the rabbis that are making those decisions, that are discussing them and coming back with answers, religious answers to questions that we have about modern day life, said that not only is it permissible, but it's actually something that's encouraged. That we talk about a value known as pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, and if we have the opportunity to save a life, that we do everything that we can to be able to do that. And it's very much like Imam Elturk was speaking about before, where if you can save one life, you save the entire world. That our tradition has that similar notion as well, and that we do our best to be able to bring life to others in the best way that we can. And so for us, it's clearing up that misunderstanding, but putting it on the table so that people realize that within our faith traditions, that this is something that's permissible and something that's encouraged, that we can help others.
If I may chime in.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so similarly in our community, the Muslim community, there's two things basically. Number one, they're not sure whether it is permissible or not. So that's always a question of, permissibility. And of course, we inform them that it is permissible. However, there's some conditions. The permissibility or the general allowance to organ donation and transplantation is permissible in principle. However, we make sure that they understand, and we all understand, that this allowance is subject to the following conditions. Number one, the prohibition of selling one's organ. So that's one concern that they raise. Is the organs being sold, or is this, because in our faith tradition, this is looked upon as a charity act, and our bodies are a trust from God, and we can't just sell parts. It's not a commodity that you sell. The other condition would be the concept of human dignity, as Shama talked about, which implies that our body parts are not a commodity. Of course, the other thing that we inform and make sure that for the organ donors is the prohibition of considerably harming the donor or the recipient. We want to make sure that this process of organ donation does not affect in any way the donors. That's one of the concerns that they have. But what if something happens to me? What if this? Well, there are doctors who will evaluate and make sure that no harm will be done, neither to the donor nor to the recipient. And of course, the consent and authorization of the donor. It is prohibited to use human organs without the prior authorization and informed consent of the donor. So these are the things that we have. Of course, not all organs are permitted in our faith. For example, vital, let's say, organ must be donated while the person is living. There are certain things that you can, you can donate, and there are certain organs that you are prohibited from donating, and that would include the ova, the sperm, the uterus, and so on and so forth. So it's both permissible and impermissible.
Beautiful. I want to move to our second question, and that is, as we mentioned earlier, there are roughly 25 or more than 2,500 people waiting on the transplant list. Half of them are from multicultural communities. We can all help to move the needle on increasing the number of donors in our families and communities by having these real conversations. How do you talk to others about the importance of being a donor within your own circles?
Well, I'm going to chime in again, if I might. I started early on talking about donation, shortly after Angela's donation. We always, in my family, we celebrated Angela's birthday, and it started out as a small group. And so I made sure that all of my family members and close friends were aware that she was a donor and that this was such an honorable and awesome thing to do. From then, it spread to now what has become Team Angie, which has been a part of the MOTEF's Life Walk annually. And we have over 50 people. So, you know, it has a spiraling aspect. I think someone mentioned earlier, no circle is too small. If you start, you know, with one or two, you can expand that to many people to get the word out. In speaking of my church, I have spoken before my congregation, and I was very fortunate in 2019 to have the pastor's support when Angela's picture was depicted on a fluorograph in the Donate Life float in the Rose Bowl parade. We were able to have a fluorograph sort of party at the church. And we did that with the full support of the congregation and my pastor. So I've gotten the word out to many people in my congregation. I've spoken to the entire congregation, as well as speaking to various smaller ministries. But you can start small and it will grow, it will expand. When people hear a personal story or just facts about organ donation and what it actually does and how it benefits the health of the community as a whole, the word will spread.
Right on. Raman, I believe you raised your hand a moment ago.
Thank you. I agree fully with what Artelia is saying and what others have said. I think that open conversations and listening, you know, compassionately to any concerns people have can do wonders. The things that both Shama and Imam and the Rabbi have mentioned as far as concerns people might, you know, have they were able to respond to the things that they said. You know, people have worries about the money trail, like what happens to the organ. So I think being transparent, open, and I think this idea of small conversations and, you know, bigger drives within faith communities can be very powerful. If people start to understand the impact that just, you know, marking that on your driver's license can have, you know, the ripple effect through the community and through communities, I think people would not be nearly as hesitant, or I don't even think it's hesitancy sometimes. I think it's maybe lack of information or lack of awareness. So just spending a little bit of time raising that awareness within our own personal circles and our personal communities. You know, I know our community, the Sikh community, is very connected to each other. So information starts to travel fast, both good information and bad information. So I think if we can be the purveyors of good, life-saving information and honest answers, and we can equip ourselves with those answers and resources to help people, we can make, you know, dramatic impact both on the living, you know, as far as their health and their well-being, and on the people who are waiting for organ and tissue donation. You know, I think, again, I'll mention again, I think and Shama mentioned this too, that the idea of service can be in our own lifetime and even afterwards.
Great. I want to get us to the next part of the conversation, the talk. When it comes to families dealing with end of life, knowing what your loved ones desire is very important. Gift of Life Michigan is encouraging discussion about organ donation early to help families honor wishes and cope with other important matters. As faith leaders, what is your role, and how have you helped families in your own communities to navigate these decisions? LJ?
I would say, you know, my community in this instance is very often the hospital, because if a family has not talked about this, if an individual has not talked about this, and then the opportunity is presented in the hospital, very often we need to bring together a conversation quite quickly. So the role of the chaplain can often be to facilitate a values-based decision-making conversation, sometimes with the family's own faith leader, and sometimes just with the family if they're not connected with a congregation. You know, and from the perspective of my personal community, my Christian community, there is an enormous amount of diversity within the Christian community. There is not a history of like Christian jurisprudence. There's no such thing. And so there's not a really like robust and clear-cut jurisprudence within Christianity. It's kind of every tradition for itself sort of thing. So because of that incredible diversity, very often it's a sort of case-by-case conversation of saying, you know, what is your understanding of the tradition? Like, what are the beliefs and values that are super important to you? What are the things that maybe there's some misunderstanding about and there's room for education? What are the things that there's some misunderstanding about, but there's not room for education because it's such a deeply held belief anyway? So it's a very nuanced conversation. And on top of that, it's extremely hard to have in the context of acute grief. It's hard enough to make complex values-based decisions when you're not acutely grieving. So I would say that it often comes down to a conversation about, you know, what is most important to your family, to this person, what feels like you could live with it and what feels like you couldn't. For me, my sort of compass that I use with families in these situations is, you know, how can we help you feel as at peace as possible in this terrible situation? And when folks from Gift of Life are involved and provide the information about the opportunity to give, if that prospect of charity, of service, of giving life, of saving life, if those things will help a family feel a little bit more at peace with an otherwise terrible situation, then that's what we want to do.
All right. Thank you, LJ. Go ahead, Imam.
Yeah, like you say, LJ, it will take experts to sit down with families of those whose life has ended. It is. I have been in situations like that, and it is really very, very difficult to talk about such subjects to family members who are grieving over their deceased. So this is a very challenging task for imams, particularly, and dealing with mainly immigrant communities to talk about such issues. I think, in my opinion, for our community, we would have to do the work way before they lose their loved ones. This way, we prepare them. And as mentioned before, I think small circles would be way more effective to convey the message than having to address it from the pulpit, which we would give perhaps general information about the importance of donating organs and saving lives. And that's something as I mentioned before, I will take to the Imam's Council and make this a priority so that we have strategy to convey to the community the importance of organ donation and all that. But it's very difficult at time of end of life and situations like this to talk about family members about donating, organs at that time, at least from our perspective.
Thank you, sir. Here's my next question, everyone. Many of our community members have experienced tremendous loss as a result of the pandemic, contributing to anxiety and mental health issues. What's your advice to individuals dealing with the challenges from this pandemic? We're all dealing with it.
Right.
That's a tough one. Go ahead, Robin.
I don't think there's any one way to deal with it. I think each individual is going to be making their own decision, but I think open, honest conversations, we're veering a little bit away from mental health. I mean, from organ donation into mental health, but I think they probably are critically related in many ways. Our society is getting better about talking about mental health, but not, I don't think we're far enough. I think being open about what's going on, if we meet somebody and they tell us that they're having some kind of illness, we're very compassionate about it. If the illness is in their body, but if the illness is in their head, I don't know if we display that kind of compassion. We sometimes expect them to, figure it out. So I think if we can, again, listen compassionately and also speak openly about our experiences, pandemic related or not. But I think that the pandemic has brought out more issues that were maybe shoved under the rug. I'm hearing more people, being willing to talk about the effect that the isolation or that deaths that they experience, that of loved ones and other things have affected both adults, children, adolescents, because the isolation really sort of changed us in many ways. So reaching out to community, connecting with whoever you can, is probably the best thing we can do. Again, those small conversations or the larger conversations can be very powerful in helping us.
Raman, you bring up a good point where they're separate, but it's also connected. And to throw a little bit more into that question, when you think about the pandemic, it caused a lot of people to just shut down. So you may have people who would be open to becoming an organ donor, probably not so much at the moment or for the past year and a half, because the pandemic just shut down their entire way of thinking normally.
That's a good point. Whatever normal thinking is, right?
Yeah. Or the regular way of thinking.
Yeah. Right. So I think, so what you're pointing to is that when we're in a crisis mode of any kind, right? Thinking anything outside, just think about like if you cut yourself, right? Like you can't focus on anything else but getting that cut fixed, but that's something that can get fixed in 15 minutes or half an hour. But if you're dealing with some kind of, deep depression or sadness or just profound grief from losing somebody and never being able to attend their funeral or something terrible like that, that they might have experienced in the pandemic. So many individual stories of isolation, grief, loss, and also some really heartwarming stories of connection, right? Some people through the pandemic were able to make amazing connections. Virtually, they were able to harness technology and do things that they never thought possible, like this connection that we're having today. But so everybody's experience was individual. I think, again, recognizing that everybody's pandemic experience, as well as everybody's life experience, is completely individual, right? So if we can help them out of their crisis, like getting back to the thrust of your question was, yes, if we're dealing with a crisis, we're not going to be thinking about the greater good or organ donation or how to help the rest of my community. So again, somebody mentioned a safe space. If we have safe spaces to talk about these things, then that will create space for conversation around important issues like organ donation and end of life, because people will not be in that crisis survival mode.
Absolutely. How can we help an organization like Gift of Life Michigan achieve another 50 years? Because you need organizations like this to generate these kinds of conversations. Go ahead, Shama.
I was going to say, kind of going off of what Ramanji was saying as well, that I think the safe space that we're talking about has also moved online. It's become virtual. And so taking all of the things that we would typically do in person, how do we make it virtual and still keep it a safe space, but also empowering people to really be kind to their own selves, being able to take care of themselves, and surrounding yourself with the right kind of people, be it in person or online. And this is where I think Gift of Life can really make a lot of strides as well in making their messaging, because with the pandemic, the online consumption of information has exponentially increased. So keep making sure that, you know, we're available very easily online. We have access to the right information online, and then getting creative with social media, because I know for a fact that people get all of their information on YouTube. Even like if I speak in terms of healthcare, you know, if somebody is going for a surgery, they will look up what that surgery will look like on YouTube and watch a YouTube video for it before they even like agree for a surgery, right? So something like that, and making sure that that's where people are seeking information and not just like from person to person. Recognizing that will be a big factor, but also helping reach across like this messaging, like this exact event that we're doing right now. I know people from a lot of different countries are watching this right now. So and making sure that all of that's easily available through Gift of Life would be really important. And especially, I know funding can be a big deal as well. So how do we kind of balance both of that in messaging, in awareness, and also sustenance? How do we make it sustainable? Would be the like a larger conversation that we can have moving forward.
May I?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perhaps Gift of Life Michigan may offer faith-based communities workshops or symposiums. We would welcome that for our community, at least for our leaders in our communities, to take the great work they do to our broader general membership of our community. I think that would be a good way to reach out.
LJ, I'd like to bring you back. Rabbi, did you raise your hand? Yes, go ahead, please.
All right. I think the last two questions, as we've been sharing, are kind of tied together as well. You know, we talked about creating that. Shalonda Jones posted that comment about a safe space. Oftentimes, I feel like I'm a clearinghouse. There are certain questions that I can answer as a rabbi that I've been trained in that have to do with Jewish content, but there are other times where people come with questions about areas that I might have a little bit of knowledge, and it's about turning to the experts around me to be able to give them the information that they're looking for and that they need. And I think that's where Gift of Life comes in. And that's how we make sure that it continues to be here for that next 50 years, is turning to organizations that have experts in that field in organ and tissue donation that can answer questions that families, that individuals have about organ donation, and that by using them, by bringing them into our communities, by having them at services or small group discussions or at educational programs that we gear around organ donation or end-of-life decisions or living wills, part of it is using those resources that are available to us and making sure that they're accessible to members. So whether it's online or in person, having Gift of Life come in has been shared and talking about what they're experts in and using that expertise.
Thank you, Rabbi. LJ, with you being someone who works in the hospital, I'd like to get your perspective on this question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I would be amiss if I didn't reiterate everything that everyone has already said. You know, Shama's made the great point a couple of times that accurate information needs to get out to people in culturally and linguistically congruent ways. And there is so much opportunity to do that in lots of different areas of our community, but especially in this season, this era that we're in of increased availability and consumption of media. You know, with that, it's a two-sided coin. There's accurate information, there's inaccurate information, and there's intentional misinformation. So we cannot assume that folks are equipped to filter out what's accurate, what's inaccurate, what's misinformation. We have to help folks with that. And one of the ways we do that is healthcare organizations like Gift of Life Michigan, really taking the initiative to get information out there in culturally and linguistically congruent ways. And like Rabbi Daniel mentioned, one of the ways we do that is that we as faith leaders become sort of clearinghouses or facilitators. We help find and identify the experts in the community in organ donation, in healthcare. We bring those experts into our congregation and we have a conversation with them. with small groups, with our wider congregation, with our wider community. So I think those would be the sort of two big themes that I would want to offer as ways to sustain and grow opportunities like this for the next 50 years.
Beautiful. Artelia, I would like to bring you in for another question specifically, and others can chime in after you respond. As a donor family member, what would you say in closing to people listening who are considering the decision to donate, and how can other donor families get involved with Gift of Life Michigan? I know that you've been actively involved, so please share your candor on how people can become more active.
Yes. Well, first, I guess I'd just like to reiterate that organ tissue and eye donation is truly the gift of life. And to give life or enhance life, the life of someone else, is probably the most rewarding thing that any individual can do. So I try to express that every time I tell Angie's story and every time I have an opportunity to engage with someone in a discussion about organ donation. I never get tired of telling the story. As I mentioned earlier, once I decided to get involved with the transplantation community, it was an easy way. Once I got involved with one organization, there were other organizations. Presently, I serve as a member and a board member of the Michigan Donor Family Council. Our main mission is to reach out to other donor families, to get them involved and to help them through that grief process, that journey that they're going to go through, to let them know that they're not by themselves, to give them that family they need to be with, to know that there's others that have gone through the same thing. And then we start to get them to tell their story, and it just spirals from there. I am also a board member of the Detroit Motep Foundation, and our emphasis is primarily in the minority communities, where we reach out to do things like educate the people in the community and dispel some of the myths. And we have a focus on prevention also. I also, as I mentioned, serve as a volunteer for Gift of Life Michigan. And at one time, on a regular basis, we did that. We would go into the Secretary of State's office, which really increased the number of donors on the Michigan Donor Registry. But there's all types of events that go on, and we volunteer and we go there to sign up people on the registry. This past September, Gift of Life Michigan held its annual donor family gathering. And I have been fortunate enough to be the mistress of ceremony for that event for the last 5 years. That's the same event that I went to in Philadelphia, where I was sort of changed my whole life and focus on what I do and where I spend my time and talent. So that at that event, I'm always able to tell Angela's story to a very wide audience. And we've done it the last 2 years virtually. So it's out there for others to see if you want to see it. My hope is that someone in the audience, or when I'm talking to someone, will be inspired to either sign up on the Michigan Donor Registry, or if they're a donor family, to start participating in the transplant and donation communities, just as I was inspired. And they'll find a whole new family. And if someone wants to join in, you can contact Gift of Life Michigan, Detroit Motep Foundation, or the Michigan Donor Family. We all of them have websites, and I think that it brings you such joy and a way to increase people who are knowledgeable about organ donation and spread the word of what a benefit it is to our entire community and how it helps to save lives.
Beautiful. Well, Artelia, thank you. The rest of our panelists, thank you as well. That will conclude our Q&A with this lovely panel. But before we head out, and we get back to our busy lives, I would like to leave you with this important message from Gift of Life Michigan about their national award-winning video entitled Matter of Faith. This video highlights the things we have in common and how our faith is a support in helping us navigate during these challenging moments. All of you take care and have a blessed day.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
have more in common than we often realize.
Those similarities can be seen in so many beautiful ways.
But it all begins with that little beat that we have inside.
It doesn't matter where you're from, who you are,
or what faith you follow.
The same sound rings inside of all of us.
All of us.
All of us.
Of all of us.
It begins in childhood,
where we are taught to love and appreciate our families.
things as simple as helping our parents prepare dinner,
Shoveling snow when it's freezing cold outside.
Keeping our bedrooms clean.
telling our families that we love them,
Even helping our siblings finish their homework.
We grow to become great leaders and neighbors.
lending support to our communities through empathy,
respect,
And caring.
And a lot of smiles along the way.
but one day, that beat we cherish so deeply
Will grow more faint.
Until it stops.
Nothing fully prepares you to lose a loved one.
It's in these moments when we're the most confused, the most saddened.
And it's crucial that we lean on the lessons of our faith.
In those lessons, you will be reminded
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
there's still hope, love,
And so much life to share.
you have that opportunity to share that gift with the world.
Through organ and tissue donation.
With your support and trust, we can change the lives of so many in our community.
and we're here to tell you that it's okay to make this donation.
As people of faith,
As people of color,
Organ and tissue donation is part of our beliefs.
it's okay.
It's okay.
Together, we can break the stigma
together we can break the stigma
and let our loved ones live on through the gift of life.
Through the gift of life.
The gift of life.
Amen.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Amen.
Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.
Ameen.
O Lord, our King, who gives us faith in life. Amen.